Let me ask you a question. When you think about collecting cards, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Do you think about back when you were a kid, you sprawl all your cards across the floor, maybe take a look at Beckett Price Guide, see what your cards were, trade among your friends or siblings. Maybe you collected your favorite team, you collected your favorite player, you could follow their career, you'd had something that reminded you of that player or that team or that just general period of your life. And while maybe that's what I think about, over the past couple of years, what's happened is we've been trained to say, no, this isn't collecting anymore. This is about making money. This is about maximizing profits. You're going to spend money, well, you're going to make money. How much money you're going to put into cards, how much money you're going to get out of it. And that's not particularly a bad thing. It's not to say that cards shouldn't be worth anything. But what was really happening, guys, these past couple of years were crazy. We were getting into the mainstream and people were talking about investing in cards, how they're going to be worth millions. You got to get your money in now because there's so much money to be made. We have to invest in cards. Everything's going up. Do it now. Don't be left out. And we were told to grade everything from highly valuable cards to the cards that you could pull out of a pack that you bought at Walmart. And we even shut down a grading company by doing this. But we need to talk about something for a second. Despite what these influencers and industry leaders were telling us, we were not investing in cards. And one of the biggest problems here is that the sports card quote-unquote market is totally unregulated. There's no rules, there's no transparency. And another big aspect is there's no exchange. We'll take a look here at the stock exchange, for example. And given the exchange is set up with rules and regulations, it can make sure that trading occurs in a fair manner. So important financial information like total number of stocks, price information can be transmitted to investors. And this just can't happen in the sports card world. And I'm going to give you an example here. Let's take a card that was heavily graded throughout the past couple years, and that's the Zion Williamson Panini Prism rookie card. Well, we can see here the base, they have a total of a little over 41,000 cards graded. The problem here is this is only taking PSA into account. We're not looking at BGS, we're not looking at CSG, we're not looking at SGC, among all the other grading companies that have properly graded this card. And we're also not looking at the total population because we don't know. We don't know how many were printed. And that's really the problem here. We can't ever figure out the total number of cards that actually exist out here because this population could change drastically. And I do suggest that you take a look at EDI Sports Cards' recent video on investing in sports cards, where he goes over exchanges and how they relate to investing. It's definitely worth a view, and he goes over it in much more detail than I do here. I also think it's important to look at just a basic definition of investing, which at its core is it's exchanging money for assets that you can reasonably expect to increase in value over time. But here's the big part about this definition that I think we need to focus on here, is that investors tend to focus on the long term rather than big gains in just a few weeks or months. And if you look at sports cards as a whole and the big massive price increases that we saw over a really short period of time, that doesn't really add up to that long-term incremental gain concept when we're talking about actual investing. So if we weren't investing with sports cards, what were we actually doing? We're speculating. And that's what these influencers were not telling you. And if we look at what speculating is, it's the hope for substantial gains in a short period of time that also carry a significant risk. We've seen high-end cards plummeting in value. And when you're speculating on something, you're not looking at it long term. You're looking at it very short term and the price fluctuations in that short period of time. And look at the continued definition here. They may rely more on price movements or technical charts. Does that sound familiar? Rather than analysis of the strength of the underlying business or asset. And what else could we say during this time period was based purely on speculation? And I can give you one example, and it's probably the biggest speculative bubble of the last 10 years or so. After they told us to invest in sports cards, they moved right into the next speculative asset. When I was first thinking about making this video, I wasn't really planning on spending a ton of time talking about investing, talking about speculating, but I do feel that it's really important that we go over those things because we really need to get away from a lot of the terminology that these grifters were putting into our head these past couple years and move on to what we are actually doing in the hobby, which is buying and selling. And we're also going to talk a little bit about trading too. One of the most important concepts is that buying and selling cards has always been a staple of the hobby, and nowadays we have a ton of different platforms that we can do that on. The most popular platform, at least online, probably being eBay, but we also have other options nowadays like Instagram, Facebook. I've even heard decent deals happening on sites like Craigslist or Mercari. Another great option is the Blowout Cards Forums Marketplace. There's really a section for everything here, from baseball, football, basketball, to vintage, to non-sports. It's really all here. It's a great place to sell. It's a great place to buy cards, even trade. If you don't already have an account on Blowout, it's something I would definitely suggest looking into. You can go over to blowoutforums.com. You can sign up for free. In addition to the marketplace, there's also sections to talk about baseball, basketball, football, anything that you're really into. And there's really a wealth of information there as well, outside of just buying and selling cards. Another option is to go to a card show. Card shows are still happening. They may be dying down a little bit as we've seen products and singles drop a bit in sales. You're going to have a lot of people exiting the space, so there might not be as many people to attend these shows, to set up at these shows. So we may see a little bit less of it in the future, but it is a good idea to get out there, talk to people, form some friendships. That's always nice to do, and especially in this current card market where a lot of people, I think, entered during the COVID time when we were all locked in our houses and the only platforms we had for the hobby were places online like eBay, Facebook, Instagram, message boards, and sites like that. The last concept I want to talk about here is buying cards to sell, or buying cards to trade. And there's nothing wrong with purchasing cards that you know in the future you may sell or you may trade. And while you might not be able to buy a huge lot of 90s junk wax anymore and grade it and sell it for exorbitant prices, we can still get some pretty good deals on eBay. We can still find some pretty good deals at shows. We can still find some pretty good deals that are going to be out there into the future. And finding those good deals on cards that you actually want to collect is what I'd suggest doing, but you don't always have to go after cards that you want to keep in your collection. Maybe you found a deal on a card that didn't quite fit into something that's in your collection, but you know that down the road you could either sell that card or trade that card to someone else for a card that you like more. Buying cards that you may not keep forever, but do you think may be desirable to somebody else, either to sell to or trade to in the future, is not a bad thing at all. Great cards of great players that other people collect is never a bad move. And hopefully box prices can come down a little bit, because oftentimes breaking product is a great way to acquire cards that you can then use to sell or trade in the future. And there's this concept that we can talk about when we talk about trading. It's called trade bait. I don't really hear this being talked about much anymore when you have a lot of focus on investing and all the other different ways to make money in the hobby. This was left out, I feel. But we can get back to this. And really what trade bait is just acquiring a bunch of cards that you can then use to move to other people for cards that you want. And I feel that trading is one of those more or less lost art forms that we can get back to now that we're looking at collecting again and we're not so heavily involved in just simply making money off of cards. Thanks for watching part 1. In part 2, we'll be focusing on methods that you can use to strengthen your collection along with pitfalls to avoid as we move past the card boom.